Hello, my name is Arian. My pronouns are he, him, and I started at the Adult and Teen Services Department here at Fountaindale Library at the beginning of July. So I did start about halfway through the summer reading program that we do here every year, and I had started as a member of the Bolingbrook community and then finished as an employee. So what I want to do today is talk about some of my favorite books that I read this summer and a few of the books that I want to read coming up next. Now I do want to mention that I typically read sci-fi and fantasy when I'm reading for my own pleasure, so this list is going to skew very heavily that direction, but I am comprehensive in many genres, so if you ever want a reading recommendation or you want to talk about books, I can talk about other genres, and I'm always thrilled to get that kind of question when I'm working at the desk. You can find me at the second or third floor. We also have this awesome thing on the website that I'll link to in the comments of this video, where you can fill out a personalized reading request form through our website, and me as well as a few other people that work here will take a look and we will get you some personalized recommendations that we have available for you based on the things you like and avoiding the things you don't like. So that is always something to check out as well. So I am going to start with one of the books I read this summer called Crescent City. It's by Sarah J. Maas. This is an adult fantasy book, but you might know Sarah Maas because she is a young adult fantasy author as well. Her biggest series is The Court of Thorns and Roses. You may or may not have heard of it, depending on if you like that genre. So this was her attempt, I think, to move into the adult fantasy writing as opposed to YA. So the differences you get there is it's going to be a little more intense in terms of violence. There is a lot of violence and gore in this book that I didn't particularly care for, and the main character is a human girl. Her name is Bryce, and she's kind of like a party girl, and she never takes anything seriously, and as the series goes you learn that she has some pretty significant trauma, and so PTSD is a really common thread that you get from her and from a character that you meet a little later on who's a fallen angel, but I feel like Maas doesn't quite get there in terms of relatable trauma and PTSD and depression. I feel like she's trying really hard to make an adult fantasy novel, but by doing so, I think she missed the mark. All she did was kind of scale up the themes that you get in her YA, and the inclusion of heavy trauma, heavy violence. Those are not things that necessarily make a book better or more intense or more geared towards adult writing. So it reads very similar to her other books. If you liked her other books and you can handle violence, it is worth the read. I personally only give it 3 out of 5 stars. The world is very interesting. There's the Fae, there's angels, there's all sorts of things going on with magic, and that is interesting and worth a read if that's what you like. And I'll probably still read the second one, but I was a little disappointed as far as being like adult fantasy. After that, I went back to an author that I know I like, John Scalzi. Lock-In is part of a duology, so it's this book and it's Head On, and it came out, let's see, I believe in 2016, and it reads a little differently in a post-COVID-19 world, because basically the premise for these books is that there is a mono-like illness that lots of people contract. It's very contagious, and what happens to a portion of the people who get sick with it is they get locked in to their own heads. They can't move their bodies, they can't control speaking, nothing. It's like they're in a permanent coma, but they're awake. And so eventually the governments of the world come together, scientists come together, we figure out a technology for people to be able to still live in the real world using like software that is in their brains then that allows them to control robot bodies or to be on the internet, things like that. So it's a really interesting background world, but it definitely hits a little different after having lived through COVID-19. So I would say be careful with that. If you were really sensitive to the pandemic, things like that, this might not be the book for you. But what it does do is it gives us a character that had that illness on his first day as an FBI agent. So he specifically works in a division for people with Hayden's syndrome, that's what they call it. and it's very procedural. It's kind of a mystery, and it doesn't really feel like science fiction, especially in the wake of a COVID world. What felt unrealistic to me is the reckless optimism that the author clearly had about how the world would handle a pandemic, because in this world, it's been about 20 years, and there's technology, there's resources, and everybody kind of came together. And as we know from how different countries in the world have been handling an actual pandemic, I feel like that was a little optimistic. So that feels more like science fiction than any of the rest of it. For the most part, it's just a procedural cop drama. The main character, Chris, is really likable and funny. His partner is a jaded woman on the police force who is also very funny and sarcastic. And it's just kind of like not a feel-good read, but it ends well. Everything wraps up. The sequel is a year later. It just happens to be the same characters solving a different type of mystery. So it's one of those books you can kind of pick up and put down. There's only 2 of them. He's got other series if you like the writing style, and I do. But he writes like it's not science fiction, and I appreciate that. I like sci-fi and fantasy, but sometimes it's nice to get a break going. I also then read Gideon the Ninth. I don't want to give you a synopsis of this one because it's the second in a series and it will ruin the first one if I tell you too much about this one. So the first one is Gideon the Ninth, and it is incredible. It is a space world. There's 9 planets, and each planet has a different type of necromancy magic. Gideon's the main character in the first book, and she is definitely a reckless, just silly, very funny, very sassy, sword-wielding lesbian who serves a necromancer in space. And like, there's not really any romance in the books, which I appreciate, but it's necromancy magic, so it gets a little dark, a little twisty, a little weird. So you do have to look out for a little bit of that, but otherwise I just really liked the world. Like, this idea that necromancy can be the basis for the foundation of a world. Their like god figure, the emperor, is a million-year-old being, basically the Necrolord Prime, that has the ability to raise whole planets from the dead. So it's just a really interesting premise, and it's very mystery because the first book is they all end up basically in a haunted house trying to solve a problem so that they can ascend to be then basically a hand servant of their god emperor. So they're all trying to like race to the finish to see who can like be the next servant of the emperor, basically. And I loved everything about it, from the writing style to just the world. It's an interesting take on necromancy magic because it's not an evil in this world. It's just that's what their magic is. So it has some very interesting connotations about what it means to die and what it means to live that I found really interesting. And then finally, one of the things I read every year is the year's best science fiction and fantasy. This one is the one from 2019. Everything's a little behind, as you know, from 2020. But what I do with these is I look at the table of contents, which is right in the beginning here, and it's a bunch of excerpts or short stories from authors that came out that year. And so I usually look for authors I might know, or just titles that sound interesting. I will flip to the back of the book where they give you a little bit of synopsis about each author, and then there's also a bibliography with recommended reading that I always check as well. So this is a way to kind of give me a quick glance at what's new and up and coming in the genre that I like, places I can go for new authors that maybe I haven't heard of. And I don't tend to read this cover to cover. I use it more as a resource, but it is how I have found a lot of authors, and something similar is available in many genres as well. So that's not all that I read over the summer, but those are the highlights. And then as far as what's coming next, I do have some exciting books that I have found. Is Ironheart. So this is a graphic novel. It's a Marvel novel, and I don't know how close anybody's been paying attention, but the MCU, which is the movies, the Marvel movies, Iron Man, Captain America, Avengers, etc., just announced that Riri Williams, which is Ironheart, will be in the next Black Panther movie, and she's also getting her own Disney Plus spinoff. So I've been meaning to read about her. She is a teenage genius that goes to MIT at 15, builds her own version of the Iron Man suit, and then is eventually recruited by Iron Man himself to kind of take over that mantle. And so it sounds like the MCU is going to be replacing Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man with Riri Williams. It's written by Eve Ewing, who is a Chicago-based poet and activist, and Riri Williams is also from Chicago. So it's nice to have that kind of local character as well. So I look forward to reading that. I've got Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. That's the first in the Wheel of Time series. I have avoided it for a long time because, as you can see, it is huge. The series is huge. He died before he finished it. Brendan Sanderson had to step in and finish it. But Amazon Prime has been working on a miniseries, so it's getting talked about, and it's one that I've been meaning to get to for years. So I figure it's probably time. I want to read it before the show comes out. Also, just came out the final book in the Shannara series by Terry Brooks. This is called The Last Druid. He's been writing the Shannara series since the 70s, and there are over 30 books in the series. But what I like about Terry Brooks is that he's a really good introduction to fantasy. His books are readable at any age, I believe. There's no inappropriate language, there's no sex, there's no extreme violence, nothing is explained in detail or gory. It can be sad, there is death, it is fantasy, so there's magic, there's bad guys, there's orcs, there's elves, there's dwarves. So it feels like very old school Tolkien-inspired fantasy. But even though it's a 30-plus book series, you don't have to read all 30 of them. He writes them in trilogies or quartets, and each one will reference the ones that come before, but you don't need to have read them necessarily to understand what's going on, which makes it really accessible. You can kind of pick a story that feels interesting and start there. You don't have to be beholden to, 40 years of Shannara series, but I'm a little behind. I haven't read this last quartet, so that is what I am doing this fall. And then finally, I am doing Doctor Who. I had never gotten into it until about last year. I am obsessed. I love Doctor Who, and there are so many Doctor Who books. So there's a big comic book compendium. So this is the 11th Doctor, Matt Smith, and it's like his whole first year of adventures. That sounds really exciting. There's novelizations. This one happens to be with the 10th Doctor and Martha Jones. There's all sorts of other ones that we have here. I have interlibrary loan requested a few. So it just gives me a way to keep pursuing something that I really love while I'm waiting for the next season to come out. So in conclusion, I read a lot. I know I read a lot. I am always reading at least one physical book, one ebook, and one audiobook at any given time. Part of that is because I work in a library. Part of that is because I'm a full-time student in a literature-based degree path. And part of it is just that I love reading. I am always willing to talk about books. I will give reviews. I will give recommendations. So if you want that kind of thing, like I said, we do personalized recommendations through the library. You can always start a chat up if you see me or somebody else you know that works here. We are happy to do that kind of conversation and recommendation, and me especially. I love books. I read constantly, and I'm just happy to have a place where I get to share that. So I look forward to talking to you about it, and let me know what you want to hear me talk about, and I'll read it, and we'll do another video soon. Thank you.